Gabriel Zimmerman stood in the marble lobby of his late father's corporate headquarters, reading the final clause of the will for the third time, certain there had been some catastrophic mistake. The lawyer's expression told him otherwise. His father, Richard Zimmerman, founder and CEO of the nation's largest commercial real estate empire, had left his 30-year-old son everything: the penthouse, the vacation homes, the yacht, the private jet, and the company itself. But there was one condition that made Gabriel's blood run cold. He had to work his way up from the bottom of a company his father owned, incognito, for 1 full year. No one could know his identity. If anyone discovered who he was, or if he quit, everything would go to charity. The company his father had chosen wasn't even in real estate. It was Harvest and Home, a rapidly growing organic grocery chain with 40 locations across the state. Gabriel had never worked a day in retail. He'd gone to Yale, earned his MBA, and spent the last 5 years managing a division of his father's company from a corner office. He'd never stocked a shelf, operated a cash register, or dealt with an angry customer demanding a refund on bruised bananas. The lawyer explained that his father had made arrangements with the company's ownership, telling them only that Gabriel was part of a corporate assessment program. His direct supervisor would have no idea. Gabriel would start as a stock clerk at the flagship downtown location on Monday morning at 6. It was Friday afternoon. He had 1 weekend to figure out how he was going to survive this. Saturday morning, Gabriel sat in his penthouse trying to comprehend the magnitude of the change ahead. His father had been diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago, fought it hard, and lost the battle 3 weeks ago. They'd had a complicated relationship. Richard had built his empire from nothing, working construction jobs to put himself through night school. He'd always told Gabriel he was too soft, too privileged, too disconnected from the reality most people lived. Gabriel had dismissed it as the old man's nostalgia for his hardscrabble youth. Now, from beyond the grave, Richard was forcing his son to understand. Gabriel looked around his apartment, at the designer furniture, and the view that cost more per month than most people earned in a year, and felt something uncomfortably close to fear. Monday arrived with cruel punctuality. Gabriel parked his Aston Martin 6 blocks away and walked to the store, wearing jeans and a plain shirt he'd bought specifically for this. He'd never owned anything without a designer label. The clothes felt strange, too ordinary, like a costume. He arrived at 5:50 and found the employee entrance. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the smell of cardboard and produce filled the air. A tired-looking man in his 50s checked his paperwork and handed him a green apron and a name tag. Gabriel Z, it read. He'd been instructed to use only his first name and last initial. The man, whose name tag identified him as Doug, told him to wait in the break room. Someone would be along to train him. The break room was small, with a refrigerator covered in notices about proper food storage, and a bulletin board plastered with shift schedules and corporate memos. Gabriel sat at the scratch table and waited. At 6:15, the door swung open and a woman walked in, moving fast, energy radiating from her like heat from pavement. She had dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, sharp brown eyes, and an expression of someone perpetually 3 steps ahead of where she physically stood. She looked at him and Gabriel felt an unexpected jolt, something electric and unfamiliar. She was beautiful, but it wasn't just that. There was an intensity to her, an intelligence in her eyes that made him sit up straighter. "Gabriel," she asked, glancing at a clipboard. "I'm Sophia Everett, floor manager. Welcome to Harvest and Home. Sorry I'm late. We had a delivery truck show up an hour early and the driver refused to wait. Let's get started. You'll be working produce to begin with, which means you're on my team. Lucky you." There was no warmth in her voice, just brisk efficiency. Gabriel stood and followed her out of the break room. She walked fast, talking over her shoulder as they navigated narrow corridors stacked with boxes. "Produce is the heartbeat of this store," Sophia said. "People come here because they want fresh, organic, locally sourced food. That means we have high standards and zero tolerance for anything subpar. You'll start by learning rotation, proper storage, and display. By the end of the week, you should be able to handle deliveries and know the difference between produce that's perfect and produce that needs to go to compost." "Questions?" "No," Gabriel said, feeling like he'd just been briefed for a military operation. Sophia pushed through double doors and they emerged into the store itself. It was enormous, bright and clean, with wide aisles and beautiful displays of fruits and vegetables that looked like something from a magazine. Customers were already filtering in, even though it was barely past opening. Sophia led him to the produce section and proceeded to give him the most comprehensive tutorial he'd ever received on anything. She showed him how to check strawberries for mold, how to arrange apples so they looked abundant but weren't likely to bruise, how to mist the leafy greens without overwatering them. She explained the store's relationship with local farms, the delivery schedule, the pricing system, and the inventory software. Gabriel tried to absorb it all, but it was like drinking from a fire hose. After 2 hours, Sophia handed him a box of tomatoes and told him to stock them according to what she'd taught him. Then she disappeared, pulled away by some crisis involving the bakery section. Gabriel stood there holding the box, looking at the existing tomato display, trying to remember everything she'd said. He started carefully placing tomatoes, attempting to recreate the artistic arrangement he'd seen her create effortlessly. A woman approached and asked him where the kumquats were. Gabriel had no idea what a kumquat even looked like. He smiled apologetically and went to find Sophia, who was resolving an argument between 2 employees about break schedules. She didn't look happy about being interrupted but walked him back to produce and pointed to a small, oval orange fruit he'd walked past a dozen times. "Kumquats," she said. "Learn the inventory, Gabriel. I don't have time to hold your hand on every question." The day was the longest of Gabriel's life. By lunch, his back ached from bending and lifting. By mid-afternoon, his feet hurt in ways he didn't know feet could hurt. By closing time, he was exhausted down to his bones. He'd made countless mistakes, been corrected by Sophia at least 20 times, and accidentally knocked over a display of avocados that took him 40 minutes to rebuild. But he'd also started to understand the rhythm of the place, the flow of customers, the constant dance of restocking and rearranging and keeping everything perfect. And through it all, he found himself watching Sophia. She was everywhere, solving problems, helping customers, directing her team with calm authority. She knew every person in the store by name. She handled complaints with grace and efficiency. She caught mistakes before they became disasters. She was, Gabriel realized, extraordinarily good at her job. The week crawled by. Gabriel's body adapted slowly to the physical demands. He learned the inventory, mastered the rotation system, and stopped having to ask where things were. Sophia remained professional and distant, offering corrections when necessary but no encouragement. Gabriel found himself working harder than he ever had, driven by a strange need to prove himself to her. By Friday, she told him he'd graduated from complete liability to merely problematic, which he suspected was the closest thing to praise she offered. On Saturday morning, Gabriel arrived to find the store in controlled chaos. One of their major suppliers had delivered the wrong order, and they were short on half the produce they needed for the weekend. Sophia was on the phone, her voice tight with controlled frustration, trying to get the situation resolved. Gabriel listened as she navigated the conversation with impressive professionalism, despite clearly being furious. When she hung up, she closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. "They can't fix it until Monday," she said to Doug, who'd come over to get an update. "We're going to have to source from the backup suppliers. It'll cost more and the margins are going to be terrible this week, but we can't have empty shelves." She spent the next hour on the phone, calling local farms and distributors, piecing together an emergency order. Gabriel watched her turn a disaster into merely a bad situation through sheer competence and force of will. When the emergency deliveries started arriving, she had everyone working to process and display them. Gabriel found himself working alongside her, and for the first time, she spoke to him about something other than work. "This job isn't what you expected, is it?" she asked, as they unpacked crates of lettuce. "What makes you say that?" Gabriel replied, carefully neutral. "You have the hands of someone who's never done manual labor. You didn't know basic things on your first day that anyone who's ever worked retail would know. And you carry yourself like someone used to being in charge. So either you're slumming it for some reason, or you've had a major life change. I'm guessing the latter." Gabriel was impressed by her perceptiveness, and alarmed by how transparent he apparently was. "Career change," he said, which was technically true. "Previous work didn't work out, needed something different." Sophia nodded, accepting this. "Well, you work hard and you learn fast. That counts for a lot. Most people who have never done this kind of work quit within the first week. You're still here, so maybe you'll make it." Something about the conversation felt like a turning point. Over the next few weeks, Sophia began treating him less like a walking disaster and more like a competent member of her team. She started asking his opinion on displays, trusting him with more responsibility. They fell into an easy working relationship. Gabriel learned that she'd been with Harvest and Home for 6 years, starting as a cashier when she was in college and working her way up. She had a degree in business management and a fierce loyalty to the store and its mission. She believed in what they were doing, connecting people with healthy food and supporting local agriculture. Her passion was evident in everything she did. Gabriel found himself thinking about her constantly. At night, in his penthouse, he'd replay conversations they'd had, the way she smiled when a customer thanked her, the fierce concentration on her face when she was solving a problem. He was falling for her, and it terrified him. Not just because she was his boss, but because of the enormous lie sitting between them. She had no idea who he really was. She thought he was Gabriel Z, a guy who'd hit some bumps and ended up working produce. She didn't know he was Gabriel Zimmerman, that he owned a penthouse worth $8 million, that he'd inherited a business empire worth billions. The deception felt heavier every day. 3 months in, the store was chosen to host a visit from the company's owners. It was a big deal. Everyone was nervous except Sophia, who simply worked harder to make sure everything was perfect. Gabriel had successfully avoided meeting anyone from the corporate side of his father's world. He'd been terrified someone would recognize him, but so far his luck had held. The day of the visit, 2 men in expensive suits walked through the store, and Gabriel made sure to be in the back room processing deliveries. Sophia gave them a tour, and Gabriel listened from a distance as she enthusiastically described their systems, their relationships with local farms, their customer satisfaction scores. The men seemed impressed. When they left, Sophia was glowing. They loved it, she told the team. They're considering using our store as a model for expansion. This could mean big things for all of us. There was a celebration that night at a bar down the street. It was someone's birthday, and half the store's employees showed up. Gabriel almost didn't go, uncomfortable with the social situation, but Sophia specifically invited him, and he couldn't say no. The bar was loud and crowded, and Gabriel felt out of place in his simple clothes among people who were genuinely celebrating. But then Sophia appeared next to him with 2 beers, handed him one, and smiled. "You look like you're about to bolt," she said. "Not my usual scene," Gabriel admitted. "What is your usual scene?" Gabriel thought about the charity galas, the business dinners, the exclusive clubs. "Quieter places," he said. "I'm not big on crowds." Sophia laughed. "Then you chose the wrong industry. Retail is nothing but crowds." They talked for hours, tucked into a corner away from the loudest of the celebration. Sophia told him about growing up in a small town upstate, how her parents ran a farm stand and struggled every year to make ends meet. She'd come to the city for college, fallen in love with the urban energy, and decided to stay. She talked about her vision for the store, ideas she had for expansion and community programs. Gabriel listened, fascinated by her intelligence and passion. He told her carefully edited stories about his life, truth mixed with omission. He talked about his complicated relationship with his father, leaving out the billions of dollars that complicated it. He mentioned going to business school, framing it as something he'd done years ago before life took him in different directions. "You miss it?" Sophia asked. "The business world?" "Sometimes," Gabriel said honestly, "but this is teaching me things I never would have learned in an office." "Like what?" "Like how hard people work for every dollar, like how much effort goes into things I used to take for granted. Like how someone can build something meaningful that isn't about profit margins and quarterly earnings." Sophia looked at him with those sharp eyes, and Gabriel felt like she could see straight through him. "You're not what I expected when you showed up that first day," she said softly. "What did you expect? Someone who'd quit by lunch, someone who'd resent taking direction from me, someone who'd do the minimum and complain about it. But you're not like that. You work harder than almost anyone I've supervised. You actually care about doing things right. Why?" "Because I'm trying to prove something to a dead man who never thought I had it in me," Gabriel thought. "Because you're watching and I want to be worthy of your respect. Because this matters more than anything I've done in my life." But he couldn't say any of that. "Because you set a high standard," he said instead. "And I don't like failing." Something shifted in Sophia's expression, a warmth that hadn't been there before. They were sitting close in the crowded bar, and Gabriel was acutely aware of every inch of space between them. He wanted to close that distance, wanted it so badly his hands shook. But he couldn't. Not while he was lying to her about everything important. The weeks turned into months. Gabriel's year sentence was nearly half over, and he'd settled into a life he never could have imagined. He worked 40-hour weeks, went home exhausted, and spent his evenings in the penthouse that felt increasingly like a museum of someone else's life. He barely used most of the rooms. He'd started cooking his own meals, something he'd never done before, finding it oddly satisfying after a day of handling food. He thought about Sophia constantly, and the feelings were no longer something he could dismiss or ignore. He was in love with her, completely, terrifyingly in love. At work, they'd become genuinely close. They had inside jokes, could communicate with just a glance, worked together with seamless efficiency. Sophia had started seeking out his opinion on decisions, valuing his perspective. She'd told him more than once that he was the best hire she'd made in years. The praise meant more to Gabriel than any business award he'd ever received. But the closer they became, the worse he felt about the deception. He was living a lie, and every day it grew bigger. One evening in his 6th month, Gabriel was closing up with Sophia. Everyone else had left, and they were doing the final walkthrough together. They were in the produce section, and Sophia was examining the displays with her usual critical eye. "You've gotten good at this," she said, adjusting an apple slightly. "I barely have to fix your work anymore. I had a demanding teacher." Sophia smiled. "I wasn't that bad." "You were terrifying," Gabriel said, but he was smiling too. "I just have high standards." "I noticed." They stood there in the quiet store, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, literally. The overhead lights had been dimmed for closing, creating an intimate atmosphere. Sophia looked at Gabriel, and something in her expression made his heart race. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "Sure." "Why are you really here? And don't give me the career change line. I've never bought that. You're too smart, too educated, too clearly from a different world. What happened that brought you to my produce section?" Gabriel felt the lie catching up with him. He wanted desperately to tell her the truth, but he couldn't. Not yet. 5 more months. If he revealed himself now, he'd lose everything. "I had to learn something," he said carefully. "Someone important to me thought I needed to understand things I'd been sheltered from. They were right. This has been the most valuable experience of my life. Someone important, a woman, my father. He died, and I realized how much I didn't know, how disconnected I'd been from reality. So I'm here learning." Sophia's expression softened. "I'm sorry about your father. That must have been hard." "It was. It is." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Sophia did something unexpected. She reached out and took Gabriel's hand. It was a simple gesture of comfort, but the touch sent electricity through him. He looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. She was watching him with an expression he'd never seen before, vulnerable and open. "I'm glad you're here," she said quietly. "I know I was tough on you at first, but you've become someone I rely on, someone I trust. That's rare for me." Gabriel's heart was pounding. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "Sophia, I need to tell you something." What? He should tell her who he really was. He should end the lie right now, consequences be damned. But looking into her eyes, seeing the trust there, he couldn't do it. Instead, he said, "I think you're remarkable. The way you run this store, the way you care about people, the way you turn problems into solutions. I've never met anyone like you." Sophia's breath caught. They were very close now, and Gabriel could smell her perfume, something light and citrusy. "Gabriel," she whispered. He kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she didn't. Instead, she kissed him back, and the world contracted to just the two of them in the darkened store. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sophia looked stunned. "We shouldn't," she said, but she hadn't let go of him. "I know, you're my boss. It's complicated, very complicated. We could keep it quiet. No one has to know." Sophia shook her head, but she was smiling. "That's a terrible idea. Workplace relationships never work. There are power dynamics and complications, and it always ends badly." "Or it doesn't," Gabriel said. "Maybe sometimes it works. Maybe sometimes it's worth the risk." Sophia looked at him for a long moment, clearly wrestling with herself. Then she kissed him again, and Gabriel knew she'd made her decision. They left the store together, and Gabriel walked her to her car. They made plans to have dinner the next night, a real date, away from work. Gabriel drove home feeling like he was floating. He'd never felt this way before, this combination of joy and terror and absolute certainty that he'd found something real. Their relationship developed in secret over the next few weeks. They were careful at work, maintaining their professional dynamic, but outside the store, they explored this new territory between them. Gabriel took Sophia to restaurants, choosing carefully, places that were nice but not so expensive as to raise questions about his background. They went to movies, walked through parks, spent long evenings talking about everything and nothing. Sophia was brilliant and funny, passionate about social justice and environmental issues, endlessly curious about the world. Gabriel found himself telling her things he'd never told anyone, carefully editing out the specifics that would reveal his wealth, but sharing his feelings, his fears, his dreams for who he wanted to become. Sophia told him about her past relationships, men who'd been intimidated by her competence or tried to diminish her ambitions. She said Gabriel was different, that he supported her ideas and treated her as an equal. Gabriel felt a stab of guilt every time she praised his honesty or said she felt like she could be herself with him. The lie between them was a constant weight, growing heavier with every genuine moment they shared. 2 months into their relationship, Sophia told Gabriel she was falling in love with him. They were in her apartment, a small but cozy place she decorated with plants and artwork from local artists. She said it casually, almost as an aside, but Gabriel heard the vulnerability beneath the words. He pulled her close and told her he loved her too, and it was the truest thing he'd said in months. They made love that night, and Gabriel tried to memorize every moment, every touch, terrified that when she eventually learned the truth, she'd never look at him this way again. At work, they maintained their secret successfully. Gabriel had gotten a promotion to assistant produce manager, which meant he worked even more closely with Sophia but also had more responsibility. He was managing inventory orders, training new employees, handling supplier relationships. He discovered he was actually good at this, good at managing people and systems in a hands-on way that was completely different from his corporate experience. His father had been right, he realized. He'd needed this. He'd been coasting on privilege and education, without understanding the actual work that made businesses function. With 3 months left in his year, Gabriel started thinking seriously about what would happen when it ended. According to his father's will, once he completed the full year, he could claim his inheritance and return to his real life. But what did that mean now? He couldn't imagine leaving Sophia. He also couldn't imagine telling her the truth. How did you explain that you'd been lying for 9 months about being a billionaire? That you owned multiple homes worth more than she'd earn in several lifetimes? That you'd been pretending to be someone you weren't this entire time? She'd feel betrayed, manipulated, lied to. And she'd be right. Gabriel consulted with his father's lawyer, trying to find loopholes in the will. Could he complete the year but continue working at the store? Could he reveal his identity but maintain his current life? The lawyer explained that the will's conditions ended after 1 year. At that point, Gabriel was free to do whatever he wanted with the inheritance. He could continue working at Harvest and Home if he chose, though obviously once his identity was revealed, everything would change. Gabriel spent sleepless nights trying to figure out the right path forward. He considered telling Sophia the truth before the year was up, hoping she'd understand and forgive him. But that meant risking everything his father had wanted him to achieve. He considered completing the year in secret and then revealing everything, but that meant months more of lying to the woman he loved. Every option felt wrong. At the 10-month mark, Harvest and Home's corporate owners announced a major expansion. They were opening 15 new stores over the next 2 years, and they needed experienced managers for each location. Sophia was offered a position as general manager of one of the new flagship stores, a massive promotion with a significant pay increase. She was ecstatic. It was everything she'd been working toward for years. She told Gabriel the news after work, practically glowing with excitement. "This is it," she said. "This is what I've been working for since I started. My own store, complete creative control. The chance to implement all the ideas I've been pitching for years. Gabriel hugged her, genuinely thrilled for her success. You deserve this. You're going to be amazing. There's more, Sophia said, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. I have input on my management team. I want you to come with me as my produce manager. It would be your department, your responsibility. A huge step up from where you are now. What do you think? Gabriel's mind raced. In 2 months, his year would be up. He'd planned to reveal his identity, claim his inheritance, and figure out how to explain everything to Sophia. But if he took this job, he'd be committing to continuing the lie, at least in a professional sense. On the other hand, it would keep him close to Sophia, give them a future together in a world where they'd started. I need to think about it, Gabriel said carefully. It's a big decision. Sophia's excitement dimmed slightly. I thought you'd be thrilled. We'd be building something together. Isn't that what you want? I do want that. I just need to process it. Can I give you an answer in a few days? She agreed, but Gabriel could see the hurt in her eyes. That night, alone in his penthouse, Gabriel paced and thought and wrestled with the impossible situation. He called his father's lawyer again, explained the situation, and asked point-blank what his father would have wanted. The lawyer was quiet for a long moment. Your father loved you, Gabriel, he finally said. The whole point of this exercise was to teach you the value of honest work and real relationships. He wanted you to understand people, to see the world from a different perspective. I think he'd tell you that wealth is meaningless without integrity. What matters is how you live, who you love, and whether you're honest about both. Gabriel hung up and sat in the darkness of his luxury apartment. He'd been so focused on completing the year, on claiming his inheritance, on proving himself to his dead father. But none of it meant anything if he lost Sophia in the process, and he would lose her if he kept lying. The longer the deception went on, the worse the betrayal would be when she discovered the truth. He had to tell her, soon, before she built her future plans around someone who didn't really exist. 2 days later, Gabriel asked Sophia to dinner at a nice restaurant. She assumed he was celebrating her promotion, but Gabriel had a different agenda. He was going to tell her everything. He'd prepared a speech, rehearsed how to explain his father's will, the year of working at the bottom, the fact that he'd fallen genuinely in love with her in the process. He was terrified, but he knew it was the right thing to do. They were seated at a quiet table in the back. Sophia looked beautiful in a simple dress, smiling across the table at him. Gabriel opened his mouth to begin his confession when Sophia's phone rang. She glanced at it, apologized, and answered. Gabriel watched her face change as she listened, excitement turning to shock, turning to disbelief. Are you serious? She said into the phone. No, I understand. Thank you for telling me. She hung up and stared at Gabriel with an expression he'd never seen before. That was corporate. The Zimmerman Group just bought Harvest and Home. Complete acquisition. They're announcing it tomorrow. Richard Zimmerman's son is taking over as CEO, Gabriel Zimmerman. They sent his photo to all the management team. Gabriel felt the blood drain from his face. The timeline had changed. The acquisition had been in the works for months, part of his father's larger business strategy. But Gabriel thought he had more time before it became public. Sophia was still staring at her phone, looking at a photo of Gabriel in a suit at some business event, looking every inch the billionaire he actually was. She looked up at him, and the betrayal in her eyes broke his heart. Gabriel Zimmerman, she said slowly. Gabriel Z, that's you. You're not some guy who needed a career change. You're a billionaire who owns the company I work for. You've been lying to me this entire time. Sophia, please let me explain. Explain what? How you've been pretending to be someone you're not for almost a year. How you let me fall in love with a person who doesn't exist. How you stood there and listened to me talk about my dreams and ambitions when you literally own the company. Everything between us has been real, Gabriel said desperately. Yes, I lied about who I was, but my feelings for you are completely genuine. I love you. That's not fake. That's the realest thing in my life. Sophia stood up, tears streaming down her face. You don't get to claim your feelings are real when everything else was a lie. I trusted you. I told you things I've never told anyone. I planned a future with you, and all of it was based on deception. My father's will required me to work at the bottom for a year without anyone knowing who I was, Gabriel said, also standing. If anyone found out, I'd lose everything. I didn't plan to fall in love with you. I didn't plan any of this. But it happened, and it's real, and I was going to tell you everything tonight before the acquisition was announced. How convenient that you were going to tell me right when it became impossible to hide anymore, Sophia said bitterly. I'm such an idiot. I actually thought you were different. I thought you saw me as an equal. But I was just part of your little poverty tourism experience, wasn't I? The billionaire learning how the other half lives. That's not fair and you know it, Gabriel said, his own anger rising. I've worked my back off for 10 months. I've learned things, grown as a person, changed in fundamental ways. And yes, I fell in love with my boss, and yes, I should have told you sooner, but I was terrified of losing you. So instead you just lied until you got caught, Sophia said. She grabbed her coat. I can't do this. I can't even look at you right now. She left the restaurant and Gabriel stood there, feeling his world collapse. He threw money on the table and followed her outside, but she'd already disappeared into the subway. Gabriel went home and spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation, hating himself for not telling her sooner, wondering if there was any way to fix this. The next day, the acquisition was announced publicly. Gabriel had to do a press conference, stand in front of cameras and explain his father's vision for the company, how he planned to honor that legacy while expanding into new markets. He talked about the importance of organic food access and supporting local agriculture. He praised Harvest and Home's mission and promised that the acquisition would only strengthen their core values. The whole time, he felt like a fraud. He just lost the only thing that mattered, and none of this corporate posturing meant anything without Sophia. He tried calling her. She didn't answer. He texted. She didn't respond. He went to the store, but Doug told him Sophia had called in sick. Gabriel knew she wasn't sick. She was avoiding him, and he couldn't blame her. He destroyed her trust in the most fundamental way possible. A week passed. Gabriel threw himself into the business side of the acquisition, working 18-hour days, trying to numb the pain of losing Sophia. He reviewed financials, met with Harvest and Home's leadership team, planned the integration strategy. Everyone was professional but distant with him. Word had spread that he'd been working undercover at the flagship store, and people weren't sure how to feel about it. Some saw it as admirable, a CEO willing to learn the business from the ground up. Others saw it as manipulative, a rich kid playing at being normal. Gabriel didn't care what they thought. He only cared about Sophia's opinion, and she'd made that clear. On day 10, he got a message from her. Not a text, an actual letter delivered to his office. He opened it with shaking hands. The letter was typed, formal, nothing like the warm woman he knew. Gabriel, it read, I've spent the last week processing everything, and I need you to understand how deeply you hurt me. Trust is everything to me. I grew up watching my parents struggle, watching them get taken advantage of by people with more money and power. I learned early that the world isn't fair, that people like me have to work twice as hard for half as much. When I met you, when I fell for you, I thought I'd finally found someone who understood that, who respected the work I do and the person I am. Finding out you were lying the whole time, that you're part of the world I've been fighting against my whole life, it broke something in me. But I've also been thinking about the person you were at work. The person who showed up every day and did the job without complaint. The person who learned and grew and genuinely seemed to care. I don't think that was entirely fake. I think maybe your father was right to make you do this. I think maybe you needed to learn what it feels like to be at the bottom, to not have power or privilege protecting you. I've decided to take the general manager position. It's what I've worked for, and I'm not going to let your deception take that away from me. But I need you to understand that there is no us anymore. I can't be with someone who lied to me for 10 months, no matter what your reasons were. I hope you learned what your father wanted you to learn. I hope you use your power and wealth to actually make a difference instead of just playing at understanding people like me. But we're done. Please respect that and don't contact me again. Sophia. Gabriel read the letter 3 times, each word a knife to the heart. He understood her anger, even agreed with most of what she said. But the finality of it destroyed him. He'd lost her. Really, truly lost her, and it was entirely his own fault. The next months were the hardest of Gabriel's life. He threw himself into work, using his father's company resources to expand Harvest and Home exactly as they'd planned. He made sure Sophia got everything she needed for her new store, approving budgets and resource allocations without question. He never contacted her directly, respecting her wishes, but he followed her progress obsessively. Her store opened to rave reviews. She'd created something special, a grocery store that was also a community center, hosting cooking classes and farmers markets and educational programs about nutrition and sustainability. It was everything she'd talked about wanting to do, and she'd done it brilliantly. Gabriel attended the grand opening, staying in the background, just another person from corporate. He watched Sophia give a speech about her vision, watched her interact with customers and employees, watched her shine with accomplishment and pride. She looked happy, or at least content, and Gabriel was glad for that, even as it killed him that he wasn't part of it. 6 months after their breakup, Gabriel was in his office late one night when his assistant informed him someone was there to see him without an appointment. Before he could ask who, Sophia walked through his door. She looked different somehow, more polished maybe, wearing a professional outfit that marked her as management rather than floor staff. But her eyes still had that intensity, that intelligence that had first captured him. "Sophia," Gabriel said, standing, "I didn't know you were coming." "I didn't plan to," she said. "I've been doing some thinking, a lot of thinking actually, about you, about us, about what happened." Gabriel's heart was racing. "Okay." Sophia walked around his office, taking in the view, the expensive furniture, the trappings of wealth that had always been Gabriel's reality. "This is your world," she said. "This is who you really are." "It's where I came from," Gabriel said carefully, "but I'm not sure it's who I am. Not anymore. This last year changed me fundamentally, Sophia. That wasn't fake." "I know," she said, turning to face him. "I've been watching how you've handled the company. You kept every promise about maintaining Harvest and Home's values. You've actually expanded our social mission, dedicated more resources to sustainability and community programs. You gave me everything I asked for with my store and never tried to take credit or interfere. You've been fair to all the employees who worked with you, made sure no one was punished for not knowing who you were. You've been a good CEO, a good person, even." "I've been trying," Gabriel said. "Trying to honor what my father wanted me to learn. Trying to prove that the experience meant something." "Why did you kiss me?" Sophia asked abruptly. That night in the store when everything started between us, you could have kept it professional, finished your year, and walked away. Why did you complicate everything by starting a relationship? Gabriel met her eyes. Because I could not kiss you, because you were the most remarkable person I'd ever met and I was already in love with you. Because for the first time in my life, I'd found something real and I couldn't walk away from that. Even though you knew you were lying to me. I never lied about my feelings. I lied about my circumstances, yes. I should have told you sooner. I should have trusted you with the truth. That's my biggest regret, Sophia. Not that I fell for you, but that I didn't give you the chance to know all of me from the start. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. I was so angry, she finally said. For months I was just angry, but then I realized something. You could have revealed yourself at any point and made my life hell. You had all the power. You could have gotten me fired, could have undermined my career, could have retaliated for rejecting you. But you didn't. You gave me my dream job and supported me from a distance and respected my boundaries. That says something about who you are. I love you, Gabriel said quietly. I never stopped. These last 6 months without you have been torture, but I respect your choice. If you want nothing to do with me personally, I understand. I'll continue to support your professional goals without strings attached. What if I don't want distance anymore? Sophia said, and Gabriel's breath caught. What if I've realized that holding on to anger isn't serving me? What if I've come to understand that you made mistakes but your feelings were genuine? What if I still love you too and I'm tired of pretending I don't? Gabriel crossed the office in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I don't want to hurt you again. I don't want you to have doubts or regrets. I'm sure I love you, Sophia said, looking up at him. I'm sure that what we had was real, even if the circumstances were complicated. I'm sure that I want to try again if you're willing to be completely honest with me from now on. No more secrets. No more lies. No more lies, Gabriel promised. I'll tell you everything. About my childhood, my father, the pressure and privilege and isolation of growing up with money. About feeling disconnected from reality. About my father thinking I was soft and spoiled. About how working at the store showed me what actually matters in life. About how you became the center of my world without me even realizing it was happening. He kissed her then, and it felt like coming home. They spent the night in his office, talking for hours, filling in all the gaps the lies had created. Gabriel told her about his penthouse, his inheritance, the full scope of his father's business empire. Sophia told him about her fear of being used, about past relationships where men had tried to control or diminish her, about why his deception had hit her so hard. They talked about trust and how to rebuild it, about what a relationship between them would actually look like given their different backgrounds and the professional complications of him owning the company she worked for. They decided to take it slow, to date properly this time, with full honesty. Gabriel took Sophia to parts of his world she'd never seen, charity galas and business dinners, introducing her as the woman he loved. She introduced him to her family, her parents who still ran their farm stand upstate, her younger brother who was skeptical of any billionaire but grudgingly admitted Gabriel seemed decent. They navigated the complications of their professional relationship by being scrupulously transparent. Gabriel made sure Sophia reported to regional management rather than directly to him, eliminating any appearance of favoritism. Sophia continued to excel in her role based entirely on her own merit. A year after they reconciled, Gabriel proposed. Not in some elaborate public display, but in the produce section of Sophia's store after hours, the same place he'd first kissed her. He got down on one knee between the tomatoes and leafy greens and told her she'd changed his life, changed him fundamentally, and he wanted to spend the rest of his life making her happy. Sophia said yes, laughing and crying at the same time. They got married in a ceremony that blended both their worlds. Sophia's family and friends from the grocery world mixed with Gabriel's business associates and society connections. Gabriel's father wasn't there to see it, but Gabriel felt his presence anyway, felt like maybe the old man would be proud of who his son had become. The whole Harvest and Home staff was invited, including Doug, who gave a toast about how Gabriel had been the worst produced clerk he'd ever seen, but had somehow turned into someone worth respecting. Sophia continued running her store, refusing to give up her career despite Gabriel's wealth. She said the work mattered to her, that she'd built something meaningful and wasn't going to abandon it. Gabriel supported her completely, understanding now what he never had before, that purpose and passion couldn't be bought or replaced. He ran his father's business empire with new perspective, making decisions with consideration for the workers at every level, remembering what it felt like to be at the bottom. They had their first child 2 years after the wedding, a daughter they named Grace. Gabriel held her in the hospital and promised her that she'd grow up understanding the value of work, the dignity of all people regardless of their bank accounts, the importance of honesty and integrity. Sophia smiled and said their daughter was lucky to have a father who'd learned those lessons the hard way years later. Gabriel would sometimes go back to the flagship Harvest and Home store and work a shift in produce, just to remember. Sophia would find him there, arranging apples or rotating stock, and shake her head with a smile. "You're still terrible at displays," she'd say. "Good thing you married someone who can fix your mistakes." And Gabriel would pull her close, surrounded by vegetables and the smell of fresh herbs, and think about how his father's final lesson had been the greatest gift. He'd been forced to work at the bottom, and he'd found everything that mattered at the top of what made life worthwhile. He'd found honest work, genuine relationships, and a love that had changed everything. He'd found Sophia, and in finding her, he'd found himself. Their life together wasn't always easy. They argued about money, about privilege, about how to raise their children with an understanding of both abundance and restraint. Gabriel had to constantly check his impulse to throw money at problems, to insulate their family from discomfort. Sophia pushed back, insisting their kids understand what most people's lives looked like, that they volunteer and work service jobs and learn the value of every dollar. It was a constant negotiation between two different worldviews, but they made it work because they respected each other, and because the foundation of their relationship was built on genuine understanding. Gabriel expanded the Harvest and Home chain significantly, but he did it Sophia's way, maintaining the commitment to local suppliers and community programs. Each new store became a hub for the neighborhoods they served, offering not just food but education, connection, and support. Sophia eventually moved into a corporate role, overseeing community initiatives across the entire chain, using her platform to advocate for food justice and sustainable agriculture. She became a voice in the industry, respected for her integrity and vision. Their children grew up spending time in both worlds. They attended good schools that Gabriel's money provided, but they also worked shifts at Harvest and Home stores, learning the business from the ground up just like their father had been forced to do. Gabriel told them the story of their grandfather's will, how Richard Zimmerman had seen something in his son that needed tempering, needed real-world experience to become genuine. The kids understood they were privileged, but also that privilege came with responsibility. On what would have been Richard Zimmerman's 80th birthday, Gabriel stood in the original Harvest and Home store, the place where his life had changed completely. Sophia was beside him, their 3 children running through the aisles under the watchful eye of Doug, who'd become a sort of honorary grandfather to the Zimmerman kids. Gabriel thought about the man he'd been when he walked through these doors the first time, arrogant and disconnected, convinced he was being punished for no reason. He thought about Sophia's suspicion and high standards, how she'd pushed him to be better without knowing who he really was. He thought about falling in love in secret, the betrayal in her eyes when the truth came out, the long months of separation and the hard work of rebuilding trust. "You ever regret it?" Sophia asked, as if reading his thoughts. "The year of working here, the complications it created for us." Gabriel looked at her, at the woman who'd become his partner in every sense of the word. "Not for a second," he said. "My father knew what he was doing. He knew I needed to be knocked down to learn what really matters. He probably didn't expect me to fall in love with my boss, but that turned out to be the most important part of the whole thing." "Your father was a wise man," Sophia said. "He was. And stubborn. And occasionally infuriating, but ultimately right about what I needed." They watched their children help Doug stock shelves, arguing good-naturedly about the proper way to rotate inventory. Their oldest daughter had Sophia's intensity and Gabriel's business mind. Their middle son had Gabriel's height and Sophia's passion for social justice. Their youngest was still figuring out who she was, but she had both parents' stubbornness in abundance. "We did good," Sophia said softly. "We did," Gabriel agreed. "We built something real, something that matters." That night, back in the penthouse that had finally become a home rather than a museum, Gabriel stood on the balcony looking out at the city. Sophia joined him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. They stood in comfortable silence, a couple who'd been through storms and come out stronger, who'd built a life based on honesty and mutual respect and genuine love. "I love you," Gabriel said, "for knowing I was worth the effort even when I'd given you every reason to walk away." "I love you too," Sophia replied, "for being willing to change, to grow, to meet me where I was instead of expecting me to fit into your world." They went inside, closing the balcony door on the glittering city below. Tomorrow they'd go back to their complicated, beautiful, hard-earned life. Sophia would head to the office to work on expanding community programs to underserved neighborhoods. Gabriel would attend board meetings for multiple companies, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Their children would go to school, then work their shifts at the store, learning the lessons their grandfather had wanted their father to learn. But tonight, they were just Gabriel and Sophia, 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. A billionaire forced by his father's will to work at the bottom, and the boss who'd had no idea who he really was. A love story that started with lies but became the most honest thing in both their lives. A relationship that had been tested by deception and betrayal, but emerged stronger on the other side. Gabriel thought about his father often, usually with gratitude. Richard Zimmerman had seen his son's weaknesses, and even in death, had forced him to confront them. The year of working at Harvest and Home had been the hardest of Gabriel's life, but also the most valuable. It had stripped away his assumptions, challenged his privilege, and taught him what actually mattered. And it had brought him Sophia, which made everything else worthwhile. As they settled into bed, Sophia's head on his chest, Gabriel felt the contentment of a life well lived. He'd inherited billions, yes, but his true wealth was lying beside him. The woman who'd seen him at his worst and lowest, who'd called him out when he was wrong, who'd demanded honesty and integrity and settled for nothing less. The woman who'd taken a chance on him when he was just Gabriel Z, a guy stocking produce who worked hard and asked too many questions. The woman who'd forgiven him when the truth came out, not easily and not quickly, but genuinely. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia murmured, half asleep. "How lucky I am," Gabriel said. "How a year that started as a punishment became the best thing that ever happened to me." "Your father would be proud," Sophia said, "of who you became, of the life we built." Gabriel hoped so. He'd never know for sure, but he thought maybe his father had planned for more than just teaching him about hard work. Maybe Richard Zimmerman had hoped his son would find authenticity, would discover what mattered beyond money and status. Maybe he'd even hoped Gabriel would find love, real love, the kind that challenged and changed and ultimately completed you. "I wish he could have met you," Gabriel said. "Me too," Sophia replied. "I would have liked to thank him for being stubborn enough to make his spoiled son work in my produce section." Gabriel laughed softly. "I wasn't that bad." "You were terrible," Sophia said, but there was warmth in her voice. "But you got better. That's what matters. You learned and grew and became someone worth building a life with." They drifted toward sleep, entwined in each other, secure in what they'd built together. Outside, the city continued its endless hum, millions of people living their lives, chasing their dreams, falling in and out of love. Inside, Gabriel and Sophia had found their happily ever after, hard-earned and battle-tested, built on a foundation of honesty that had taken time to establish, but now stood unshakable. Gabriel's last thought before sleep claimed him was simple: gratitude. For his father's wisdom, for Sophia's forgiveness, for the year that had seemed like a curse but turned out to be the greatest blessing of his life. He'd been forced to work at the bottom, and he'd found everything at the top worth reaching for. Not wealth or power or status, but love and purpose and partnership with someone who made him better simply by existing in his world. And in the morning, they'd wake up and do it all again, living their beautifully complicated life, raising their children to understand both privilege and responsibility, running businesses that actually made a difference, and loving each other with the fierce honesty that had become their foundation. It was everything Gabriel had never known he needed, and everything he'd never take for granted again.